Singing Dutchman Productions. Hello and welcome to Doug's Front Porch, a podcast where I get to sit down with friends old and new and have honest conversations. Today I welcome Nancy Rodabaugh to the front porch, a friend of a friend. We'll start with it that way. Nancy, welcome to the front porch.
Hey, thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, so I know that our paths have crossed, maybe at the Broken Axe or at some other place when maybe I was playing music. But I got to know you through Todd, your significant other or whatever. I don't know, whatever we want to call you. I'll let you call him whatever you want to call him.
He's my partner.
There we go. Okay, partner. And I just happened to been following a recent journey that you were on Facebook. And as you were getting to the end of that journey, I reached out to Todd and said, hey, do you think Nancy would come on the podcast and talk about this? And he right away answered for you and said, yeah, absolutely she would. So I'm so glad that you actually did agree. But I always start every episode the same way. Tell the audience a little bit about yourself. Where were you born? Where'd you grow up? What kind of things did you do as a kid? Let's start there.
Okay. Well, I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Um, Grew up there until I was 11, and then my dad's job changed, and that's what brought us to this area, to the Lock Haven area. So I've been here since that time. I was going into sixth grade. 60 years old. I just am retired for 1 year, which is why this all kind of worked out for me.
What kind of things did you do as a kid? Were you into sports or music or anything like that?
No, actually, not really. We did a lot of playing outside. We did a lot of camping when we were young. No, mostly it's really nothing that I was really drawn to. I read a lot. I've always read a lot. So I've been an avid reader since I was like, my parents were taking me to the library, and it was like time to bring home a stack of books.
Good. All right, I want to delve into the whole reason why I asked you to be on the show. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, Nancy recently completed a major journey, and it's a journey that I've known about through friends of mine that have also done it. But I want to introduce the audience to what you just completed because it's not an easy task. So, Nancy just finished walking the Camino de Santiago. So, let's start with that for people that know nothing about it. What is the Camino de Santiago?
Well, it is a 500-mile pilgrimage across northern Spain, was the trail that I was on. It started in France at the base of the Pyrenees. The first 2 days went over the Pyrenees. And then from there on, it just continued 500 miles until I was about 3 days walking from the coast of Spain.
So we know this. It's a roughly 500-mile path, pilgrimage path, as you said, and people have been walking this for hundreds and hundreds of years in Europe.
Yes.
Because the trail ends in the church, or at the church where St. James is believed to be buried, or bones from St. James, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, so this trail is out there. So let's start. How did you come to know about the trail?
Well, my first exposure to it was after watching the movie The Way with Martin Sheen and Emilio Estevez. Before that, I hadn't had any idea that this even existed. And in it, people have been doing it for 1,000 years. But anyway, I watched that about 10 years ago, and I was just really intrigued by it. I thought, what is this? What is this about? And I guess it really just spoke to me. Like, I want to do that someday. I think I could do that. Now, this is my first time even to Europe. So, it was kind of a big thing for me to like say, okay, this is it. I'm going to do it. But that's really where it started, is with the movie, and I just put it in the back of my head, and it's been there for about 10 years. And I figured when I retired, or I figured I'd know when the time was right. um, and that's just what happened. I retired and thought, you know what, well, I was 58, and I said I'm going to do it when I'm 60. There's my goal. I'll do it when I'm 60. And I when you put it out there to people, you kind of commit to it. So there was no turning back at that point. um, so after I retired last June, I started to really kind of do research. I read so many books, people's walks, people's journeys. Um, I listened to podcasts. For a whole year, like, I just was pretty much, that's what I was thinking about. That's what I was.
I'm glad you brought up the movie The Way, because there's probably people out there that have no idea about this movie. It is an excellent film, everybody, and they just re-released it this year, and I know they were doing some talks. Like Rick Steves, famous European travel guy, was doing sessions with Martin Sheen and Emilio Estevez, live performances of the movie. It's a really great film. If you haven't seen that, guys, put that on your list. So you saw that movie and it talked to you in some way. I guess my question would be, okay, why that walk? And when we have, like, the Appalachian Trail is pretty much in our backyard, and there's all these hiking trails all over Pennsylvania and Northeast United States. What was it about that specific journey that you said, that's what I want to do? I don't want to walk the Appalachian Trail. I don't want to do the mid-state trail that cuts through, bisects Pennsylvania. I want to do the Camino.
That's a good question. Well, I think that that was because I understood from the Camino, and from what I read and what I learned about it, is, I wasn't going to be carrying my tent. I wasn't going to be carrying my food. This was, and I loved the history part of it. Like, this was starting, and they've been doing it for 1,000 years, that you just walk outside your door and you start in that direction. This is what the Europeans did. And however it worked out, it worked out. Like, you take your basic necessities, only the things you need, you carry very little, and you just trust that it's all going to work out. It's all going to.
We're going to come back to that because I want to talk a little bit about that. But for people that don't know about this trail, again, like in the Appalachian Trail, for example, there, you are carrying your tent and your sleeping bag and whatever you need to live. But on the Camino, there are all of these stops along the way that are essentially like hostels or small hotels or something like that, geared towards these walkers, correct?
That's right. They're called albergues, and they're like a hostel. And there, I stayed in three different types. Um, the first type was a municipal albergue that's run kind of by that local government village. Um, Lots of beds. Like, some of them had 75 beds, bunk beds. Some of them had 150 beds. And you couldn't book these in advance. You had to just show up, be there when they open, and keep your fingers crossed. So that was the one that I mostly stayed at because they were inexpensive. They were €8, um, as opposed to, there were other ones that were private, that were smaller. Maybe the accommodations were a little. I hesitate to even say that they were better. Maybe they were a little cushionier, but not always. But they cost a little more. But they were a good backup if I started and went to the municipal and there were no beds left. Then you can go and try for a private one. But people were able to book those in advance. So that made it a little tricky sometimes. So those were two types that I stayed in. The municipal was €8. The private ones could be anywhere from 12 to, the most expensive one I think I stayed in was €20 for the
That
night.
that's so cheap though. When I mean, compared to, accommodations anywhere else. Yeah.
Right. And then the third type that I stayed in, which I think I'd have to say was the ones that were the best experiences, not because of their accommodation so much as the enveloping of the pilgrims. And those were the ones that were parochial. So they were run by the churches. And sometimes the accommodations were very sparse. Like, for example, one of those, I slept on a mat on the floor. There was not a mattress, it was not a bed, it was a mat. There was no hot water in this one. Skip the shower. Um, but they were so amazing in how they embraced the pilgrims that came. It was a donation, whatever you felt you wanted to pay. I understood that the parochials would never turn anyone away. Now, I was always there in time to have a bed, so that I'm not sure how that worked if you showed up and the beds were full, but I was told that they would never turn anybody away. You sleep on the couch or whatever, they would accommodate you somehow. But one of those in particular, well, two of those that really stuck out with me was, one was run by the convent. So there were 4 nuns and they were running the whole show. And when I checked in there, they kind of gave me a schedule, which was a little unusual. You know, here's a schedule. At 5:30, we will have vespers. At 6, we will have a sing-along. And then at 7, we will go to mass. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that sounds good. I can do that. So did the vespers. That was over at the church. We all walked back together, and you didn't have to do it. Like, you did not, there was no, you were forced to participate. But, you know, I was open to the experiences. I'm like, oh, do whatever. We went back over to the albergue, and the one nun pulled out her guitar, the other ones passed out song sheets, and we gathered in this small room, sitting on benches. People were sitting on the floor, sitting on the steps going upstairs, and we like sang songs, and most of them were in Spanish. So thankfully I had a song sheet. But they also did, like, they did Amazing Grace, and that was in English. But it was just the best time. It was so fun. It was such a great evening. And so many people participated, like Catholics, not Catholics, people there for spiritual reasons, people not there for spiritual reasons. So that was great. That was such a good experience. And then after that, we walked over to mass, and they had mass, and of course everything was in Spanish, and my Spanish is very limited. But I can kind of muddle through, and you know, mass is similar despite which country you're in or what language you are. But then after the mass, then they asked all of the pilgrims, the people that were walking, to please come forward, and they gave us a special blessing. So that was just a really great experience. So that was one of the parochial albergues that I stayed in. One of the other parochial ones that I stayed in, they had dinner for us, but we all had to go down and help make the dinner. So in this one, there were 13, there were probably about 20 people. And the kitchen was about the size of an average bedroom, like in your home. It was tiny. And there are all of these people trying to do their part to help. One guy's in charge. His name was Habe. And Habe didn't speak any English. And I will say I was the only English speaking person there that night. There was There were Spanish, Italian, German, French, um, but I was the only English speaking. So that was, you know, Habe's telling me to do something, and I'm going, point, help me out here. Um, but as far as like setting the table, filling the water jugs, I cut apples for the salad. But there was a gentleman then there that was making this gigantic pan of paella. So, paella takes time, comes in stages, till they put it all together. But while he's making the paella, everyone else is making the salad, um, cutting the bread and the baguettes and putting it on the table and setting the table and filling the water pitchers. And everybody that was there was helping to make this dinner in some way. And it was so well organized that I just can't even believe all those people had their hand. If I was in charge, I probably would have been like, "Hi, people, get back, get back." Um, but how they just kind of organized it, told everybody what to do, and as soon as they were done, and he was so joyful about it. I think that was the part that was just for me. It was like just so joyful about what he was doing. Just a short little Italian or short little Spanish man. So anyway, then after that, when dinner was ready, we all sat down at this big, gigantic table. And they brought the paella in. It took two people to carry it. And then they scooped it out and then they passed the bowls down to, the whole end of the table. Of course, there was wine and there was bread. There's always pan, always bread. Um, and we had a wonderful dinner, just a wonderful dinner. It was delicious and it was with great people. And again, I was the only English speaking, but I was sitting next to two French couples, and well, they were just so pleasant and fortunate for me. So many people know some English, so that was wonderful. But there was one young lady there that we had seen since the very beginning of our trip who translated things for me. So I was so grateful for that because I would probably not have really known, the blessing. Um, and they talked about a couple of intentions at the time before we ate. And she always interpreted for me, and she interpreted for the French folks as well. So we had this great, big, gigantic dinner, and everybody's, filling up and all this paella, and then somebody brings croissants for dessert. And then they said, now, what we're going to do now is we're going to leave all of our dirty dishes and we're going to go upstairs and we're going to have, I don't remember what he called it, but it was kind of like a prayer session, though it was more than that. So we walked upstairs and there was this small room, like in the attic. There was a teeny tiny door and we all had to take our shoes off. And we walked in and it was like this small altar in this small room. And it was on the floor and there were benches and it was cold that night. So they brought in blankets for us and we're all huddled together on the side. There was no heat in there. We're all huddled on the side, waiting to see what are we doing? What's going on here? So as it turned out, they gave every language that was represented a prayer. And then they went around the room in every language. So if there were 4 French, they had 1 French prayer. I was the English prayer. It was a German prayer and so on. So we did that and it's just amazing. And then they took out this little cardboard box and it was like a file folder. And he went through again each of the different countries and they pulled out, like, for me, an American. And people had written intentions on these papers. Like if they had some special needs, if they wanted to share something. And these were from 6 months ago. He said that these have been in this box for 6 months. So nobody there, this didn't belong to anybody there. They pulled it out and then we just went through each of the languages and we shared what those intentions were for those people. And for example, the one that I read was about a young lady who was just begging for forgiveness because she had done something in her past that she was very ashamed of. And she was having a hard time forgiving herself, and she didn't know if God was forgiving her. And she was really trying to be kind to herself, but she was really struggling. So those were the kinds of things that we went through, and everyone spoke and read what was on that sheet for them. I really don't know what the others were because I didn't understand their language. um, but so that, and then afterwards we all sang a song, and then we went downstairs and cleaned up, and everybody cleaned up. Everybody again in this kitchen, passing dishes over, like you know, from one to the other, then resetting the table for breakfast because then they have breakfast for us as well. So that's why I say like the parochial albergues were just a completely different experience than the other ones.
Yeah. I want to
Uh,
go back to something that we already talked about, how you planned in the sense of you did research and you listened to podcasts and you saw the movie, of course. I have to ask, did you physically train as well?
well, I get asked that a lot. So I have walked for years. Like I've always enjoyed walking, just pretty much like every day. And um, but when it came to this, I'm like, well, we do need to break in our shoes. We do need to practice with a backpack. So we did do some training. Todd and I did some training here. We started like 8 mile walks and with our shoes, like just to try and break them in. And it was funny at first. We're like, well, 8 miles. Like towards the end, we're going, ooh, 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 we need some water. We're like, let's take a rest. Um, but then we worked up to 10 miles, and then we did 12 miles, and then we did 14 miles a couple of times. But mostly what we did was flat. So, and we carried our backpacks. We put all of our gear in our backpack so it would weigh what we wanted it to weigh. Um, and so we did not a lot, probably, oh, we walked, I'd say less than 8, 10 times together doing that. What we should have done, looking back, is we should have walked more hills because we knew we were going over the Pyrenees. We knew that was going to be the beginning. Um, but I didn't really know that there was going to be as many hills as there were mountains to cross. So I don't think we were as prepared for that as we could have been, should have been.
So
But we
when you were on the trail, what was your average day? How many miles a day were you doing?
um the average when I took all of my days, and I found the average was 15.7.
But then some days would have been longer than that, like you said, and then some days would have been a little bit shorter, depending on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think my shortest day was 8.7. And then I think my longest day was just short of 22. Yeah. Yeah. So, but it's funny because people would say, well, didn't you get tired? Well, yeah, you do get tired, but I think what happened was you just kind of worked up to it. And you knew that you're going to wake up 6 o'clock, you're going to be hitting the road at 6:30, and you're just going to walk until you get where, I knew we were going. And you just, I think your body just kind of gets used to it. It gets used to it. It kind of builds up to it. Yeah.
You touched a little bit on this with your experiences in the albergues, but I need to ask you this too. This is a pilgrimage route, and people have been doing it for 1,000 years in a sense of being a pilgrim. What role did your faith play in this journey?
Oh, That is a good question. Well, I'll tell you what. I was not drawn to do this for the religious reasons. Yes, St. James, you go, you go. And but for me, it was more about kind of, the adventure, the meeting people. There was a lot of time. Now, saying that, it wasn't a religious journey as much as these other things, the adventure. I wanted to do it. I so into like the history part of it. They've been doing this for 1,000 years. That appealed to me. But with that being said, I don't think you can really do this, especially the time that I was alone, because I was alone for about 15 days, without having some spiritual experiences. You know what I mean? Um, I spent a lot of time just praying, a lot of time just being so incredibly thankful that I was there, that I was doing it, that I was healthy enough to do it. And that's all part of like just having faith in it all working out. It's trusting that it's all going to be okay. But I spent a lot of time just being so thankful.
Do you looking back on it, do you think you had some religious experiences or spiritual experiences?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I spent a lot of time thinking about religion, um, which surprised me a little bit. You can't hardly go into it, those giant, beautiful cathedrals. They're breathtaking. They're just breathtaking in their beauty and in their history and the building of it, like the whole experience. You, it is an overwhelming feeling, religious feeling, thankfulness feeling. But on the other hand, I gotta say this to be fair, there was part of me that struggled with that because I look at these beautiful buildings and they were just so amazing. I can't hardly even explain it. But I also assumed, maybe that's wrong to assume, but that these buildings were made and built by slaves, by prisoners. Um, and they were so beautiful. And I wondered, while they were putting all their money into this, were the people so poor? Um, were they taking care of the people in their villages as well? You know what I mean? So I had some conflict there. Like, what? Hmm. I wonder. Like, I would do that. I'd wonder. I wonder if they took care of the people the way you like to think that churches take care of the people first.
You met a lot of strangers, I'm sure, on your journey. How would you describe how you were treated by strangers on this adventure?
Oh, it was amazing. Honestly, um, everybody was accommodating, everybody was kind. The Spanish people were amazing. I mean, I could just, they were amazing in how accommodating, how they were so patient. Like, I didn't speak Spanish, so I'd be trying to communicate. I used Google Translate. Um, they used Google Translate back for me. Um, it was great, and I felt like nobody ever lost their patience with me, and they were always willing to accommodate. One time, here's just a little example. One time, there was a boy at the albergue, a young person in his 20s at the albergue that had sprained his ankle, and the albergue was at the top of this hill, and we're like, well, he needs food, like he can't get down to the bottom of this hill. So we were going to take him a sandwich back after we had dinner. And, you know, um, I was having a hard time finding a place that I could just get a sandwich because the kitchens close at a certain time, and they siesta and the kitchen's closed. You can stay and have drinks, but the kitchen's not open to make anything. So we left and where we had lunch and we were walking, and I said, I just want to find a sandwich. So I went into this market and just asked if they had any bocadillas. And the gentleman said no, they didn't have them, but he communicated that he's like using his arms and giving me directions and saying, go on out here, go up there, half a block, and so on. And so I repeated it just to make sure. And he just got up. He's the only one in the market. He's the only one there at the register, and waves me to follow him, follow me. And he walks me like a block away, leaves the store unattended, walks me a block away to make sure that I know where I'm going. Oh my God, are you kidding? Wow, amazing. And that happened again in Madrid right before we left. We were looking for a place to have some drinks, and the restaurant that we were at was closing, but he wanted us to go to a different spot. So he left his restaurant, the only one, and he's walking us through this park and pointing up the road. And I'm like, oh gosh, okay, great. Those were just 2 times. There was a man in Pamplona when we were leaving there, an older guy who was just out for a walk, just out for a little stroll. And he could see we're pilgrims, we're dressed in the pilgrim clothes and we have our backpacks. And he kind of waves us to follow him. And it wasn't really on the path. We're following the way marks, but he was giving us a little shortcut. And all it really did was it just looked like took the triangle off. It just made a straight line, so we didn't walk down the sidewalk. But for the next 20 minutes, this man walked half a block ahead of us, but just kept turning around and waving. Keep coming, keep coming, keep coming. And then he pointed his hand the other direction, saying, this way, this way. And he just to make sure that we didn't get lost. I mean, it was just such a sweet little experience. There were women when we were going through some of the villages. You follow the shell and the arrow so that you know the way. And I don't know if they do this every morning, but there's these women like up in their second story window, just sitting there with their arms on the windowsill, pointing people in the right direction. This way, this way. Oh, no, 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 this way. Everybody was so kind, so nice. We kind of wondered, do they get tired of all of this? Like, do they get tired of these same people every day coming through their little villages? But nobody ever showed any signs that they were frustrated with us. They were great. And the people that were pilgrims with me, everyone we met, oh, so helpful. When you all have the same goal in mind, when you're all doing the same thing and you're all walking these incredible distances, it's always the same thing. Well, where did you start? Mm-hmm. Well, what's your plan for today? And how are you holding up? And again, in different languages, but fortunately for me, so many people know English or some English.
All right. So looking back on it now that it's over, what was difficult about the journey? One thing that was difficult.
The most difficult thing was when we flew into Madrid. It was May 1st, which is a holiday for Spain. That's May Day. We planned on taking a train or a bus to Pamplona. And then from Pamplona to get to St. Jean Pied Port, we were going to Uber or taxi or figure it out. We figured a taxi from there. Well, when we got there, because it was a holiday, there were less buses or no buses. The trains that were running were full. We got there at about 9 o'clock in the morning, and The only bus tickets or the only train tickets we could get were at 7:30 that night. And they were first class tickets, so they were really expensive. And that was only getting us to Pamplona. So that meant I can't remember how many hours that was going to take, but then we would end up in Pamplona, like at midnight or something crazy, or 11, and then still have to get to St. John, which we had a reservation for, but the albergues kind of closed at a certain time because everybody gets up early. So sometimes lights out at 10 o'clock. So we knew we had to get to that albergue before it closed because that's where we were staying. So we ended up buying the train tickets, thinking that was our only option, and we'll just figure it out. Trust it'll work. We'll figure it out. But then after we bought them, I said, well, let's just see what an Uber would do. And it turned out that's what we ended up doing is he scheduled an Uber, and that Uber driver, that's a funny story as well. He knew we were going to Pamplona. Well, he said he was happy to take us, but he was driving a Tesla. And that meant that I think it was like every 2 hours, we had to stop for half an hour to charge it. So every 2 hours, he had to stop and charge his car. So that took us, of course, it was like an hour and a half extra. But as it turned out, when we were talking with him, he knew where we were trying to go. And he ended up taking us the whole way. So we left around noon, and I think we got to St. John Pied Port. It was probably about 7:30. So that was like our first big, I don't know, difficult time. And it was a pretty expensive
I'm, I'm
trip,
sure.
but we figured, hey, it worked.
So, what was something about the journey that was easy, looking back on it?
Hmm. I think one of the easiest things, now this is just for me because I can be a little guarded with strangers. Like I don't think I'm always real right out there. I'm a little more introverted. And so that was part of my goal was I thought I want to try and be a little more, rather than wait for someone to invite me to go to dinner with them, say, hey, let's go for dinner. So I think that was a little easier for me than I thought it would be.
That's great.
So
That's great.
just be a little more open to people.
Um, did you ever want to quit?
Never,
Never. That's awesome.
never, never even occurred to me. There was one day there was a terrible, terrible storm, and I was going over the highest point on the Camino. It's where the Cruz de Ferro was. And it was storming and windy, and my poncho was like all around my face. And honestly, it was so windy that if I didn't have my trekking poles, I'm sure I would have been blown away or blown over. Straddling, I was completely drenched, completely drenched. And that was the 21.79 mile day. And the whole time I just kept thinking, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. That's the only time that it was really, really hard. And I knew at the end of that day, because my daughter Jackie, was coming to meet me in I guess later that night, she was coming from Salt Lake City. So I booked a hotel in Ponferrada because I wasn't sure what time she was going to get there yet. And like I said, the albergues closed. Like if the lights are out at 10 o'clock, no one can come in. So I thought I'm going to book a hotel, and that way I can get her whenever I need to get her. I can find her wherever. So the whole time I was in this storm, and it was cold and it was windy and it was blowing, I kept thinking, there's a hotel at the end of this day. There's a hotel at the end of the stay with a hot shower and a towel, like a real towel, and a bed. And so that's what I kept thinking. There's a hotel at the end of this day. But that was the only day that was really a hard day for
All
me.
right, walk me through the your last day. Your how emotional was that? The last morning that you woke up knowing that this was the day I was going to reach the end of the trail and get to the cathedral and all that. What was that? What were you feeling? What were you thinking? And then when you finally got there, what were you feeling and thinking?
Oh, well, Jackie was with me at that time. Jackie walked the last 9 days with me. So that was awesome to have her there. Um, it's interesting. In some ways, it was like, this is it. This is so exciting. We're going to get there, and we only had, I can't remember how many miles, but it wasn't a real long trip that day. I think we were getting there at 10:30. Um, so I was really excited about it. I was really excited to get to that plaza where I've seen so many people with their pictures, and I was a little like, this is my last day. This is my last day to pack my backpack in the morning. This is our last day to start off. So there was a real mix of joy and a little bit of, this is it. This is it. This is the last one. Um, but once I got there, it was so exciting. Um, I wasn't overwhelmed with, some people are overwhelmed with joy and break into tears, and some people are just so relieved that they fall over and collapse. And just, I was just like, I can't believe we're finally here. I can't believe we're here. Can you even believe this place? Look at this place. This is amazing. And we're taking our pictures. Um, but we got there in time for me. And I said to Jackie, I said, if we're there in time for the Pilgrim's Mass at noon, I would like to go. And if we're not, that's okay too. However it works out, it works out. But if we're there, I'd like to. So we were there in time. I went in to the Pilgrim's Mass at noon, and I don't know, it was one of those feelings again. I just was overwhelmed with such emotion that I just sobbed. I just cried. I was so thankful to be there. I was so in awe of the whole cathedral, the experience. I can't believe I did it. I can't believe it's over. I can't believe I get to go home. Um, but mostly it was just, I cannot believe how thankful I am that I did this, that I was healthy enough to do it, that I did not have any major issues physically at all. Like, there were people walking around with blisters, people that were taking taxis, people that had shin splints and knee issues. And I had one teeny tiny blister on my baby toe for like 2 days. And that was all. I just felt like I, I don't know how it happened. I don't know how it happened, but it happened.
So here's my last question for you about this trip. How did this experience change you?
Oh, well, one thing I really learned about the Spanish people that I'm trying to bring back with me is they're just so relaxed. They're so chilled, like, just relax. Um, Whether they were waiting on us for our food or our drinks, like, no one was in a hurry. They weren't in a hurry to keep my wine filled. They weren't in a hurry to give the check. They weren't in a hurry to clear the table to get you out of there. I Sometimes we sat there for 20 minutes before anybody came over to do anything. We saw somebody working, a male girl one day, and she was just like walking, just out, like she was out for a little stroll. And I thought, look at this. These folks have it figured out. Like, one is uptight about anything. And I thought that's something that I wanted to bring back. I just wanted to be a little more, um, don't just, it's all fine. It's all fine. You don't have to be in a hurry. We don't have to be in a rush for everything. I do think I like to think that I am more open to people and their differences.
That's great. Yeah. I would imagine that for anyone that does what you did, it has to change you in some form or another. I mean, I don't think you can have an experience like you had and have it not affect you positively, negatively. It has to change people in some way. Uh, it just would have to in my mind. I mean, I've never done a trek like this, so I can't speak. But I mean, I've talked to other people that have, and they all say the same thing. Like they're not the same person at the end of the trip that they were at the beginning of the trip, for sure.
Yeah, it definitely changes you. I think this just kind of opened my eyes to a little more, be aware of people around you and your environment and what's going on. Less guarded, more accepting.
Well, Nancy, I thank you so much for sharing this story with my listeners, and hopefully it'll inspire some of them, maybe not to do the whole Camino de Santiago, but to get out and walk. There's a lot you can learn on a walk. I think, and you've experienced this firsthand. I close every episode out with 10 quick questions for all of my guests that have nothing to do with what we talked about, but it gets my listeners an opportunity to get to know you a little bit better. So, are you ready?
I guess.
Yeah, here we go. All right, question number one. What is your morning drink of choice?
Ooh, coffee.
Yeah, and how great
Cafe
was the
con.
Spanish? There you go. I was gonna say I've been to Spain. I know a lot of things when you were talking about the way the Spanish look at life is very
Oh,
different from the typical Northeast American, right? So,
yeah.
and their coffee is delicious, right?
Oh, so good.
It
So
is, isn't it? All right, question number two. Who is a go-to musical artist or group for you?
Hmm. Go-to musical artist. Hmm. Hmm. I've always been a Bruce Springsteen
That's
fan.
great. Yeah. On when you were walking, were you listening to music or did you have like no earbuds in, you were just walking and taking in nature?
I had no music,
Okay.
nothing. Just had it quiet where I was talking to people.
Okay. Okay. All right. Question number 3. What movie can you watch over and over again and it never gets old?
The Breakfast Club.
Oh, that's such a good film.
I
Yes.
love that movie.
No, it is. It's a great movie. All right,
Uh,
question number 4. What is the last thing that you read?
oh, um, oh wait, what's the name of it? I just finished it actually 2 nights ago. The Vanishing Act.
Okay. Is it
And
a novel fiction?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay. Question number 5. What's your favorite pizza topping?
mushroom.
Oh, that's the right answer. Good job, Nancy.
Oh,
Question number 6. Okay, this one, given our conversation, I'll be curious to see what you say. Laying on the beach or going for a hike?
oh, ouch. Beach.
Okay, all right, okay.
There's
Uh,
nothing like the beach.
yeah, number 7. You've invited me over for dinner. What are you making?
Oh, that would be interesting. I, if you were coming for dinner, I would probably, hmm, oh, ay. What would I, I would really like to serve you ramen.
Okay, hey, I'll be there for that. That sounds delicious. Did you learn how to make good paella while you were on your trip?
I learned how to eat
Eat good.
it. Eat good paella. Yeah,
I'm
because we
sure.
had a lot. It was so good.
Yeah, I've had it there. It is good. All right, number 8. Given that you've done all this traveling, this would be a good question too. What is a dream vacation destination for you?
Oh, destination or the dream trip?
Oh yeah,
Since
dream trip would be fine too. Yeah.
okay, since I did this, um, another trip that I really want to do, and probably this will be in a few years, is I'd really like to just drive cross country and hit the national parks.
Oh, yes. Yes, 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 yes.
Hmm.
Well, I've done that a couple times and it is completely worth it. Completely worth
Yeah.
it. All right, number 9. What is something that you're afraid of?
Mm, snakes.
Did you see any snakes on the trek?
Just one dead one.
Just one dead one. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Last question. Now you're retired, but I'm going to make you think about this. What job other than one that you've had would you love to have?
Oh, I would love to work in a bookstore.
Okay. Yeah. That'd be nice, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So, Nancy, one bit of advice. If anybody that listened to this is now saying, you know what, I'd like to try or do more, learn more about this or do this, what's your advice? What's your best advice to them? Where do you start?
Oh, if they want to do this, I would probably like advise them to hook up with a couple of different Camino groups, like on social media.
Okay.
There's a lot of information there where they can call me.
Hey, there we go. Well,
Tell someone about it.
you're the new sales rep for the Camino de Santiago, at
Right.
least for Central Pennsylvania, we'll say. Well,
Yeah.
Nancy, I thoroughly enjoyed following you from via Facebook and your journey because Todd would share your photos, and there were days where I just wanted to be there walking that trail, just looking at the photos. And hopefully someday I'll get to see that part of Spain. I've been to Madrid and Toledo and some other places in the southern part of Spain, but I haven't been up to the north there where you were. But yeah, I hope someday to get to that part of Spain. I don't know if I'll ever walk the whole Camino, but just to walk some of it, I think would be an experience. But I just want to thank you so much for sharing your journey with my listeners here on the show. And God, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you very much for asking me. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you and take care.
Oh, thanks. You too.
Thank you for listening to Doug's Front Porch, a conversational podcast with your host, Doug Maidenford. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. 5 stars only, please. Follow along on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Just look for Doug's Front Porch. Also, please feel free to tell all of your friends about the show, and I'll see you all next time on My Front Porch.